Hello, this is Neil Buchanan with Rock Our World. The fall festivals are just around the corner, and it's been on my mind and heart to talk about them before they start. So I'm a little tardy. It is now, I think, the 12th of September, and I've covered how God's calendar works in some detail, and I'll do a brief overview and try and make a correction in something I realized I was doing wrong. I'm misusing the word month, or I'm using it with a double meaning, and it's not supposed to. It's I guess in the back of my mind in English, month is connected with the moon, but in this case, there's no connection, and it's somewhat like our Babylonian calendar. We have our months of January, February, March, April, so on, and they have no connection with the moon at all. So in God's calendar, it's the same way when God refers to a month in going back into Genesis and some of the descriptions of the recording of dates, like say through the flood, the recording of dates. The months are numbered from 1 to 12, and there's 30 days in each month. Now, this is all explained in the book of Enoch, a book that was somewhere along the line was rejected from the, what do they call it, the canon. But it was men that decided this, and it was religious bodies. And I've mentioned this before. Satan is the god of this world, and he is control of religious bodies and doctrines and so on, and what is kept and what's thrown away. And there's 3 books, and I've talked about these before: the book of Enoch, the book of Jubilees, and the book of Jasher, and they've all been rejected at present day. There's times in the past they were not, and my belief is this: that the biggest reason is they all contain, especially Enoch, information about demons and where they came from. And Satan does not want himself revealed. He's the god of this world, and he is, as time gets shorter and shorter, he's very angry. He is going to lose his place. He's going to be put in a prison for 1,000 years. At any rate, Enoch described how the calendar works. It goes, I'll do a brief explanation. You find we'll start in the spring. You find the spring equinox, the day, and remember, a day starts and ends at sunset, or at least the typical day does. There's other days that are very specific where they start and end with a different sign. They always start with a sign and end with a sign. The Lord said right in Genesis 1:14 that he put the sun and the moon in the sky to give us signs to tell us when the appointed times are. And so back to the spring equinox, you find it in the spring, then the very next day you start counting 3 30s in a row, or 90 days, 30 per month. So you've gone 3 months, and then you stop counting and you wait for the summer solstice to pass. And once it's passed, the very next day you start counting again. And most of the time there's only one day that you're not counting, the day of the solstice or the equinox. But at least one time every year, the 4 signs that the sun gives, the 2 equinoxes and the 2 solstices, at least once every year, that's a 2-day wait. And again, it's self-explanatory. You just count your 90 days and you wait. And the day after the equinox or the solstice, you begin counting again, another 90. So here we are, just a few days before the fall equinox. And the spring and the fall equinox are of greatest importance, because all but one of the 7 festivals of the year, of the Lord's festivals, fall in either spring, the first month, right after the spring equinox, or in the fall, right after the fall equinox. So here we are. We are a few days before the fall equinox, and it is going to come upon us in September 22nd, on September 22nd, apparently at 8:21 in the morning. So kind of right in the middle of the day, when you consider a day starts at sunset and ends at sunset. So the day change, somewhere in the world, there's always going to be an international dateline, and it is not Greenwich. That's man's system. And I've discussed this in some detail before, and you have to go back in another episode. It's a little more complicated where on earth that's going to be. And wherever it is, it'll be there for a full cycle of the moon. Anyway, we're talking about the sun cycle here. This is the calendar that Enoch described. So on September 22nd, we'll have the equinox. So the 23rd is going to be the first day of the 7th month, which is the day of trumpets. And you will find that, or the feast of Teruah, and I've talked a little bit about that too. It means a great noise, but I think trumpets is a reasonable translation. It says one of the New Testament authors, or the inspired commentary, talks about how the day of the great trump, when Christ returns. So that the understanding is that this is a picture and a celebration of looking forward to when Jesus Christ returns to this earth in power and glory. And of course, that's right at the very end of the tribulation. So it's a celebration also in the fact that now the tribulation is over. It's a very, very difficult time. Most of the earth's residents will die according to the prophets, and the army of God, or the bride, they're both the same, will have been gathered and done the majority of the work during that time of the Lord's work, of spreading the understanding and the truth of His ways over the entire earth during this troubled time, where everyone alive will know what's going on. So there we have that's just a brief understanding of what the Feast of Trumpets is all about. And that's the first day of the first month, the day after the fall equinox in this part of the country, on September 23rd. Now the next festival is the Day of Atonement. And it's understood, it's the only feast day that we fast. And it's a full fast, no water and no food for 24 hours, or not 24 hours, from sunset to sunset, which is close to 24 hours. So always a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on the time of year. And those are the signs, again, that start and end a day in God's system. So the Day of Atonement is understood to be, so far, God will give more and more understanding to all things as time progresses. This is the time of the restoration of all things. So as the years go by, we will know more and more. The Day of Atonement would, as understood, is connected with what Yeshua talked about, or Jesus Christ, when he was asked about the last days, and he talked about the time after he returned, he would sit on his throne and judge the nation. So it's a day of judgment. And so, it's a tough day. The nations stand before the Lord, and they are found that they've done a good job or a bad job. And as he said, they'll be like the sheep and the goats. He'll separate one to one side of them and one to the other. And the goats don't have a very good report, and their judgment's difficult and harsh. At any rate, that is the only day of a festival that we fast. It is a very solemn festival, And then just a few days later, on the 15th of the 7th month, so we went to the first day for the Day of Trumpets. Again, we'll cover this again, which is the 23rd this year of September. And then the Day of Atonement that is the 10th day of the 7th month. That would fall on October 2nd. And then we have the Feast of Tabernacles, which is kind of changes the tone completely. It is as understood, it's a celebration of the kingdom coming, and the time we won't have to deal with Satan and the demons. They will be locked in a prison for 1,000 years, and God's ways will be kept in fullness for that full 1,000 years. And that begins on the 15th of October, or sorry, 15th of the 7th month, which transferred to our calendar would be on October 7th. And then it carries on for 8 days. Now, there's a number of places where God says that it's a 7-day feast, but then there's this 8th day added on. The complete understanding of why God did that is not known yet, at least to me. One of these 3 books, remember I showed you in one of my episodes a compilation of books by Lumpkin. Boy, I should have brought it with me, but go back in my episodes, and it has the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Book of Jasher, and then a few others. One is supposedly by Abraham. Anyway, within that book, there's an explanation of where this 8th day came from, that why God added on this 7th day. I think it was one of the patriarchs that did it, and then from that point on, he said, okay, from now on, we're going to do this. So always, the 8th day always brings to mind for me that it's talking about the time of the new heavens and the new earth. And the 8th day, I've pointed this out in my opinion, is an idiom referring to the new moon festival, which in a sense is a time that's out of time. It's taken out of the continual cycle, we'll call it, the theoretical continual cycle of 7 days, 6 work days and a Sabbath, 6 work days and a seventh and a Sabbath. And then in the cycle of the moon, recall from my episodes when I described all these things, the calendar, the sun is in charge with its 4 signs each year of the months of God's calendar. The 12 months of 30 days each, and then there's these 4 breaks at the equinoxes and the solstices, and most of those are 1 day, but at least once a year there's one of those that's 2 days, and then within every 4 years you're going to find 2 of them will be. But it always stays completely in tune and on time with the rotation of the sun and the equinoxes. It always is in place. The first day of spring, the first day of the first month, is always the day after the spring equinox. And again, in the fall, what we're talking about right here is the first day of the 7th month is always the day after the fall equinox, and is always the Feast of Trumpets, and will fall on, carried over to our calendar. It will always be September 21st, 22nd, 23rd, in there, in what we call fall, the beginning of fall, after the equinox. So, as I've pointed out before, the moon then, see, the sun is in charge of the calendar of God. It gives the signs. The moon, however, and again, let's go back to Genesis, where it says, Genesis 1:14, it says, the sun and moon were put in place to give us signs for all the appointed times. And then when we go to Ezekiel 45:17, we find out that the Sabbath, the new moon festival, and the yearly festivals are all the appointed times of the Lord, the whole works of them. So the sun is in charge of the calendar. The moon is in charge of the 6 working days, the 7th day, the Sabbath, and the new moon festival. And I've described all that in my 3 episodes on the In Search of the new moon festival. So go back to that and get a more complete explanation of it. But I do realize I was misusing the word month. You cannot attach the word month to the moon cycle, or it just becomes completely confusing, because if a month, and again, we're translating from Hebrew to English, and a month, if we use the understanding of a month to mean these 30-day segments, and that's how it's translated into English in most translations, or as far as I know, all translations, then we cannot use that word month for anything to do with the moon, because it's already been used for something very specific. So I will try my best to always refer to the moon cycle. And the moon cycle is approximately 29.5 days, but it's very, very erratic. It's almost impossible to predict a long ways into the future, because the moon's orbit is not constant. It wobbles and comes in and out and goes all over the place. It's constant in the long, it's constant. It's never going to fall out of the sky. I mean, God made it the way He made it so that we would always have to be watching. We couldn't predict it ahead of time. We had to watch for the signs. And so every month, every moon cycle, there I did it right away. Every moon cycle, you're watching the moon, and we just had a Sabbath. We just saw the first quarter of the moon, the perfect half in the sky. We had a little trouble this round because it was been cloudy for days and days and days, and we goofed a little bit. We had to guess at when the Sabbath was going to be, and it wasn't until the end of the Sabbath the moon finally showed itself for the first time in several days, and here it was the beginning of the Sabbath, not the end of it. And the sign for the beginning of the Sabbath, the first one of the month, is a half in the sky, a perfect half by a naked eye. You just look at it, and if it looks like a half, that's as the sun sets, that's the beginning of the Sabbath day. And then the next 3 Sabbaths will be on that same day. It'll be 7 days later, 7 days later, 7 days later. And then the moon disappears for a few days, and that's the new moon festival. So the moon is in charge of those 3 segments of time: the 6 working days, the Sabbath day, and the new moon festival. And the new moon festival, I believe, this is my opinion, this is what's come to me as understanding, that it looks forward to the new heavens and the new earth. And it's like a piece of time outside of time. It gives you if you think of it that way, the 7-day cycle is continuous. This break, you just don't count it. It's just time out of time. And it looks forward to the time that is completely apart from the 7 days that depict the 6 working days of man, the 6,000 years that man will work on this earth and make the mess he does. And then the 1,000 years, the Sabbath day, looks forward to the 1,000-year kingdom, when Satan and his demons will be in a prison, and everything on this earth will be done God's way. So that is a brief understanding, as I see it, of what the New Moon Festival is all about: a time outside of time. And it's not counted in the same way that you don't count. When God speaks of a day, there's 3 places. Well, we'll say there's 2 places where the day, in our terminology, means 2 days. And again, I'll go and point back to 1 Samuel chapter 20. The whole chapter talks about a new moon festival, and God almost always refers to the new moon festival as the day of the new moon festival, and yet in 1 Samuel 20 it lasted 2 days long. So that's God's terminology, and when I started to understand this, I was reminded of how God says, my thoughts are not your thoughts and my ways are not your ways. And another instance that was similar to this is when you realize from the book of Jubilees that God doesn't count the 50th year of a person's life. It's just a time out of time. And then again, the 4 days, and they're described as days in the book of Enoch, that you don't count in the counting of the calendar. These 4 breaks at the 2 equinoxes and the 2 solstices, they can be either 1 day or 2 days by our terminology. But by God's terminology, it's always a day. And the day means from the first sign to the last sign. So most days the sign that begins and ends is sunset. But on these specific days, you have a different sign. In the case of the calendar, you finish counting 90. That's the sign that you stop counting. And then you start again after either the equinox or the solstice is over. And in the case of the new moon festival, the sign that it starts it is you've finished the 4th Sabbath. And you always know that after the 4th Sabbath will be the new moon festival in the moon cycle. And it will last either 1 day or 2 days, and it is about half and half. But it's unpredictable. You have to be watching. It kind of tricked us this last round because in all the 8 years I've been watching, I just didn't get a chance to see the moon. Just got a glimpse of it one day in the middle of the week, and our best guess was we had a 1 day new moon and that we were going to have Sabbath on this past Friday. Well, it turned out it had been a 2 day new moon. And we will learn more as time progresses. So there's a little bit of uncertainty there, but you can always correct it. If you get the wrong day, you can always correct it to the right day. And study the book of Enoch. Read through. The language is a little bit awkward, but if you follow along what I have taught, I think you'll be able to figure it out. And try your best to never refer to the moon cycle as a month in any way, because we've already used the word month to describe the 12 30-day months of God's calendar that Enoch described. So the moon cycle, we'll try our best to always refer to it as the moon cycle, and it is very erratic, and you have to watch it month by there we go, cycle by cycle, to know which day you're at. So here we are. We just finished. I kept 2 Sabbaths in a row because we hadn't been able to see the moon until the Sabbath was over. What we thought was the Sabbath was just over, and the moon showed itself. And here it was a half in the sky, and so that meant it was the beginning of the Sabbath, not the end of it. So now we'll know which day the next 3 are on, and then we'll know the day after that. The sign for the start of the new moon festival is that the 4th Sabbath ends, and we know the new moon festival is over when we see the first crescent of the new moon in the sky, of the moon in the sky. We won't call it the new moon. See, the Jewish people changed the system somewhere along in their history. They invented their own way of doing this, and it's wrong. It's obviously wrong because it doesn't match Scripture. Saturday is not the Sabbath, nor is Sunday. That's a Babylonian calendar and has no connection with the moon or the sun. All of God's appointed times, including the Sabbath, the new moon festival, and the 7 yearly festivals, are all connected and given to us by signs from the sun or the moon, or in some cases, both of them work together to show us signs. And Enoch describes all this, and I've given more detail back in my episodes of Search for the New Moon Festival. I believe I've covered all I wanted to, so I'll sign off, and I'll see you next time on Rock My World with Neil Buchanan.